But I'd like to first make mention that today marks the 1-year anniversary of the very first Eden Alternative Live show. That's right. We went live for the very first time, April 2nd, 2020. Now, we created the Eden Alternative Live show as a way to bring time-sensitive and relevant information to not only our field, but to the general public. And our hope was to inspire people to think about things differently and to hopefully do things a bit differently too. So we're going to pop a little segment from our very first show with Dr. Bill Thomas and Dr. Al Power in the comment box, and we hope you check it out. Now, I'll tell you, you can also access all 70 of our past live shows via our learning management system, Evolve Online Learning. So we'll give you that link as well. But I don't want to delay this conversation anymore. I've been looking forward to today's conversation for weeks. Our guests today will openly share some of their pandemic experiences, ways they not only survived this past year, but how they're now thriving and reclaiming their beloved community culture one day at a time. So without further delay, let me introduce you to our panel of experts from Denver-based Christian living communities and a management company, Cappella Living Solutions. Jill Vitale-Awesome, President and CEO of Christian Living Communities and Cappella Living Solutions. Jane Keller, Vice President of Senior Living. Pat McBride, Vice President of Clinical and Compliance. Pam Sullivan, Vice President of Communications and Strategy. Brad Boatwright, Executive Director of Casey's Pond and also an Eden Registry member. And Don Backstrom, Executive Director of Claremont Park and also another one of our registry members. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Pam Sullivan to the stage, who'll tell you a bit more about their organization and set the stage for our conversation today.
Thanks so much, Meredith. Just to tell you a little bit about us, we call ourselves CLC-Cappella for short. We own and operate 22 communities in 6 states. We are going to be celebrating our 50th anniversary next year, and we are a Denver-based not-for-profit. We serve about 3,000 older adults and then, of course, their families, and we employ about 1,600 team members. And we have a really cool vision. We spent 2018 and 2019 working on this. So our vision is creating communities where aging is honored and celebrated. And we were so looking forward to really exploring that in 2020. We had also spent some time reworking our value statements. And so we had a great plan for 2020 to really talk about our vision, to talk about our values, and to really hit home our culture. And then, of course, things changed and we didn't have control over that. For us, for this conversation today, we're going to kind of go chronologically our experiences through the pandemic and share with you. And it's going to be an open conversation because we all had different experiences at different times. And we're going to share with you little nuggets for leadership lessons. What was happening for us in January and February, our top-notch clinical team was watching what was happening in China. And the first thing we started doing is saying, hey, production shutting down on PPE, stock up. That was kind of what we thought our impact was going to be. And so it was actually a Saturday, March 7th, 2020, where we just jumped right into the pandemic. And the reason was we had a sweet little kid who was sang in a choir at our Claremont Park community, and his dad had been diagnosed with COVID. And so we had to wrestle with and decide, okay, did we have an exposure? Do we do community notifications? Do we do a press release? And that was the start of daily leadership calls for the organization to try and figure out what was going to happen. And really, for us, the first lesson in reflecting back, of course, because hindsight's 2020, pun intended, I guess, is that there was a sense of we were a little naive. And Pat, I'm going to call on the whole team here because we're all going to just jump in with our thoughts here. But Pat McBride, you've summed it up really well of how naive we were at the beginning of the pandemic, thinking, gosh, we've got this handled.
I do. I remember in late March, early April, we were just kind of getting a little taste of COVID in Denver and a little in our communities, as Pam mentioned, I remember that Channel 9 News wanted to talk to us about norovirus, or about the virus, COVID virus. And I remember people saying, well, you guys do really well with the norovirus. It's, a virus is a virus. And so I remember Channel 9 News sitting in my office, and I remember holding up what we call the neuro notebook, which is how do we deal with any kind of virus, specifically neuro, what everybody's job was, how we could get on it quickly. And I remember being really naive, thinking, okay, it's a virus. As long as we clean and we wear PPE correctly and we isolate when we need to, everything's going to be fine. We might have one case, maybe two cases. Boy, were we naive. Soon as with, our communities, our nation, it blew up. And then we started really talking about, okay, now what do we do? And the clinical team, we were really pretty comfortable with this. We were, okay, we've got this. We're all nurses. I was a ICU and an ER nurse. I just jumped into that mode of, okay, safety and security, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're going to write policies. We're going to tell people what to do. We're going to train. We're going to get equipment. We're going to be fine. I looked at my team and I said, okay, you are going to do PPE. You're going to do training. You're our policy queen, our regulations. We wrote hundreds of policies and changed them based on, as Pam said, the 6 states we serve. And each state had something different. And we were on it. We were there to protect and serve and take care of everything. So that was the beginning, but we were very, very naive about this is going to be like any other virus. And as we all know, that is not what happened.
And I think that's where it really came into, as soon as we knew better, we did better, but we thought we knew what we were doing. And there was a little bit also, I remember those early days, there was this little bit of frozen. We were a little frozen, like, what does this really mean? And Don, as a community executive director, you really had this reaction because you wanted to think about it a little bit, right? And then you had Pat and her team and your director of nursing kind of barking orders, right? So tell us a little bit how you felt from pivoting from frozen to, I got to do something. Don, you're muted.
Thanks, Pam. Yeah, you say frozen, I say paralyzed, afraid, scared to death, maybe. And I do think that, denial is an important coping mechanism, especially when you don't have anything to replace it with. And I think having something to build from, that neurovirus binder was actually something to build from. Right away, though, I think we started thinking about what impact is this going to have to residents. We did start thinking about the risk would be that the virus would come in and what would the mechanisms be for the virus to come in. So I could feel my personal world getting smaller, and I could also feel the community getting smaller. And those are some of the initial thoughts that I had even before we had our first positive case. I just remember thinking, seeing the images of other nursing homes in Washington and what they were going through. I just remember really being paralyzed, really feeling fearful, and kind of being comforted by that denial of like, oh, that could never happen here. Maybe the virus won't come.
And I do remember feeling like some people were the kickers in the pants. They're saying, kick it along. And other people were like, no, not quite yet. And then I do remember us kind of switching roles a little bit too. So I think the leadership lesson was it hit everybody a little bit different, and no one stayed in one state too long, a state of being. They switched a little bit. One thing from my end of the world was communications, and we adopted very early on timely and transparency as our guidance. So we were communicating often. We did go to these huge town halls where we were communicating to all 22 communities, and we were laying down the law and telling them how it's going and reassuring that we knew how to keep everyone safe. The thing that we did that I think was really important is we were humble, and we also admitted when we didn't know. And if we didn't know something, we then tried to follow up and answer the question. And I think sometimes organizations get so caught up in, well, we're the authority here and we must know. And so we admitted when we didn't know, and then we tried to figure it out. And, Jane had a lot of experience with this, because during those town halls, we let people submit questions, and some of them were really hard. And we had to really answer those questions. And we still shared the really hard questions and shared those out. This was a time of when we started to have all of our firsts, right? The first positive. Brad, tell me a little bit from a community executive director standpoint, how did that feel with your first positive? What do you remember from that?
I would say, after you processed your thoughts about, I hope that staff member's okay. What does this look like for that person? What is the ripple effect going to be? But on the greater community, I had a lot of concerns about how is the entire valley in the Steamboat area going to look at this, because we were the first story on the front page around the virus. It was not just our shock moment, but it was for the entire community. We had been so transparent that we were putting out the information so quickly that we were the source of what does this virus look like? How is it impacting people? Oh my goodness, we've seen what's happening in Washington. What's going to happen at Casey's Pond? And there's no words to describe that punch in the gut. You're anxious, you're nervous, you're scared, but you also have adrenaline knowing that, okay, this is going to war now. We're in go mode. And you actually have to balance that and at the same time create this calm for everybody else, right? So you've got all of this internal struggle. Your heart is tight, your muscles are tight, but you're the duck on top of the water. Everything's moving below. But the greater community and that response, it flipped on us. It was total support. We just had comments. We had people putting up signs. They were doing everything they could to support Casey's Pond. And it was a game changer for us, and that happened within one day. There wasn't a delay. There was instant support. And that, I think, is what helped us create that calm across the community for residents and our team members. It was the single biggest factor, I think, to change the mood.
Right. And, a lot of us had those first moments, and Pat and I had a really hard moment when we had our first death from COVID. Pat, do you remember what that felt like? I'll share what mine was, but you're the one who had to call me.
Yeah, I remember making that call, Pam, and I remember it like it was yesterday. It was such an impactful situation. I was at my daughter's house. She made my husband and I, dinner. We're having a lovely dinner. And I got a call from the community that we had our first COVID death. And I remember getting up from the table, going into the bathroom and crying like a baby. I just cried and cried. In fact, it makes me teary-eyed now. And I remember having to say to myself, okay, this is the first of many. You better stabilize yourself, get ready. You've got job to do here, and let's go. But I remember it hit me like a ton of bricks.
And then I would receive that call from you, and we had adopted timely and transparent, and it was already a long day. We had already done probably 10 hours of work that day, and I decided to take a quick walk, and you called me, and I sat on the sidewalk in my neighborhood and bawled. And I get teary still. And it took me the longest to write that notification. That was the longest one I've ever written in my life. And I think, and I'll let everyone speak to this, but I think that was part of what we had to learn, is that we couldn't stop it. We did everything we could, but it wasn't completely stoppable, and that it was okay for us to be hurt and sad by it. It felt like we lost. It felt like we let people down. That's how I felt, because we'd done all this work and put all these protocols in place, and we put all these restrictions in place, and it felt like, oh my gosh, we still lost. Does anyone else have a perspective? Because all of us had that first moment.
this is re-traumatizing me. I can just go right back to the moments. I made a decision early on that I would try to personally call everyone that was positive. And this was before we had the language of asymptomatic positive, or, we were thinking that everyone would be coughing and having fevers that had it. And so care partners being surprised by, like, I felt fine when I came, and then it wasn't until 48 hours after. And by that time, people had gotten it, and the residents had gotten it. And so I remember those phone calls and just being so choked up, and your mom has tested positive for COVID, and we don't know what that means exactly, but we're here for you. And I just want you to know personally that I'm, that we're doing all that we can to treat her, and and then getting their kind of perspective of what their goals of care would be, and then kind of passing it on to the clinical team. I just remember going from paralyzed to the reality of, like, this is happening. All those things that we talked about in terms of an overwhelming amount of deaths that we would have to deal with as a community. All of that fear, all of those possibilities were coming to light as we started down that road of not knowing how this was going to end. And I think that was the hardest part when talking to families, was we don't know. And then just to Brad's point, that's when I was time and time again inspired. I went from dreading those calls to families to just being so amazed at how families said, we're here for you. You're heroes. You're caring for my mom. We know that there are a lot of unknowns. We know you don't have the answers. So it was just so, for me, thinking that I was going to comfort them kind of led to them comforting me. One more story I'd like to tell is, because we live in a community that has many different levels of living, and the health suites was the most impacted, obviously, by this. The rest of the community, the residential living area of the community, they decided on their own that they were going to put together a parade every Friday. They would parade around the health suites and make, noisemakers, yell at us from the windows. And again, I'm going to get choked up now, but I remember looking out the window thinking, wow, I can't believe that so many people, care, and they're not being paralyzed by fear. So maybe I can kind of be encouraged by that.
And is that a great example of citizenship, which is one of the things we really look at is, our communities are living, thriving communities. We're not here just to serve older adults, there's purpose. So that gave purpose to those residents, that they were giving back to those folks who were really struggling at that time. So I think that's a great example of it. Jane, you were about to add something too. What did you want to talk about with your first?
I was thinking back, I don't know about anybody else that's listening to this, but I want to forget about it, right? Move on, move forward. But I was thinking back to those painful times, and I would reach out to Pat, because I knew that Pat was really, we were all depending on Pat, and many of us, I was depending on Pam. We were all depending on each other. But Pat always came to mind, because the buck stopped with Pat. We call her Pat McFauci in our communities. And I just felt for Pat and for the team that was really behind all of the decisions and the policies, and how we were really trying to learn quickly. And I was somewhat removed in the beginning. We were in transition with leadership in one of our communities that we support in Indiana. And I had volunteered to go there for a few days, what I thought was a few days, and support the community and just be there to answer any questions. And that's when everything started to grow with the pandemic. And my few days turned into a couple weeks. And it really resonated with me being in the community at the very beginning. It was eye-opening to see how much education you had to provide to families and to team members and to residents. And it was just very, very hard to tell a family member, I'm sorry that you can't come in. I know that you've taken your mother to church every Sunday for the last 25 years, but you can't do it today. So it was really, really difficult. And so I felt and continue to feel for our executive directors and all of our leadership team members in the communities of all of the very difficult decisions they've had to make through the last year, and for our leaders in the organization.
Yeah, and I remember, it sounds silly now, but one of the biggest things we got frozen about was testing and mandating the testing. So was there going to be enough PPE? Was there going to be enough tests? And we had a core group of leaders who met every single day to wrestle this. And I think we went a good 10 days. Every day at noon, we hopped on the phone with each other and pros, cons, wrestled it out. And we could not. And part of it was none of us wanted to make the decision. It was a hard decision to make. And we kept looking to Pat, and then we would look to our interim executive director, CEO. Jane would weigh in one day with an idea. HR would weigh in one day with an idea. I would weigh in one day with an idea. Pat, do you remember those days? And I do remember you saying, why is this all on me? Because it was a clinical situation. And so we were trying to alleviate that for you, but it's hard. It was really difficult.
Yeah, I did feel pressure at that point. It would impact so many things. It would impact closing our communities, losing staff members, all kinds of things. And I remember having that pressure was really pretty strong. And I do remember, Jane, you reaching out. Everybody on this call reached out to offer support and help. And I remember we were frozen. And then I remember when we said, it's just not the right time to test. And I remember how we all just took a deep breath and said, let's just say no right now and come back and look at it later. And it felt so good when we did that. But we were, we're very careful about the decisions we made, because we really examined all the different effects it would have for different situations and people.
And Brad, you had a totally different situation, because where you're at, and Brad's located in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. You are one of two in the area, but really the only senior living community right in the city proper. You have a very healthy relationship with the health department. So you are having to follow health department regulations, what we were telling you, what CDC was saying, and you did start down the road of testing more frequently. Do you want to talk about how you, as a leader, kind of took all of this and balanced it? Because I know it was frustrating for you. It had to be hard.
Yeah, I remember it clearly. And I remember these discussions that we had about testing, and we really were kind of the guinea pig that, we were the model that people were looking for. And I remember being on a call about, Brad, what does testing look like there? And what are the impacts? And, we were trying to formulate a lot of what ifs, and we were living it at the time. So we were, I would say, the balance of perspectives and the different comments we were getting and the different directions we were getting actually helped us. Truly, I mean, we were going through it for the first time, but at that time we had the support from everybody, knowing that, look, Casey's Pond, you're figuring this out. You're one of our first. And it kind of changed that. We really didn't have this pressure of, Casey's Pond, we want you to do it this way. You need to make sure that you're reporting results. All those things, if you remember, came after. I mean, it was just a barrage of start getting tests. We're going to get you tests. Just start testing. And at that time, we didn't have the tools. We didn't have the tracking tools. And if we go back to that time and really think about that, I wrote a journal every day so we would not forget these things. And that first week of testing was just winging it. We were winging it. We knew that we had to put that huge swab deep in the nose of people, and everybody hated it. But we did. I mean, that's just what we were doing. And we were just like, you know what, we're going to figure out tracking all these things later. We're just going to get these swabs in a tube, right? And we're going to educate on the fly, because we didn't have all these resources. So it helped so much, though, because we were small. we had the local health department here. They were coming in. It was a unified front. So you could see all these people. It wasn't Casey's Pond going in and using these swabs. We had people around us that were supporting it. So, it's difficult to even think about how we have changed and how structured it has gotten. And then also, we'll probably talk about it later, but how accustomed people got to it so quickly. It was that shock, I'd say, that first 2 weeks. And after that, it was talking like, okay, it's time to do the brain poke. And it was just, from that point on, we've been doing it for over a year now. And, but I do remember those discussions of what if we start testing, are we going to lose 30% of the staff? Are they going to leave? Those were scary times thinking about what that would look like for the community.
Yeah, and I think what you're really touching on, and Dawn talked about it a little bit too, is we then entered this phase that we're on this roller coaster ride and we never knew when we were going to get off. And we're still not off it. We're still on the ride, right? So it's interesting how we become accustomed to the unknown and how we became accustomed to building the bicycle as we were riding it. That's one of Pat's favorite, I think it's one of Pat's favorite sayings, or it's also poised and fluid. We're poised and ready and we're fluid. So those were our catchphrases that we would say to each other just to lighten the situation a little bit. But it was amazing. And so that's kind of, the midpoint of the pandemic. We were really on this ride. We didn't know when it was going to end. We didn't know where it was going to take us. And you both have already talked about it, but I want to really emphasize the leadership lesson of reaching out to your greater community and considering your community to be more than just the people who work within your four walls. We were sharing across all the different communities, all 22, connecting them up, reaching out to your health department, reaching out to the local churches. We became beggars. I mean, I remember begging. I begged to be on every TV station I could in the Denver metro area, begging for PPE, and people showed up for us. They made gowns for us. They made masks for us. Talk a little bit about that sense of community, because you did feel like, okay, we're in this by ourselves. And then really when you realized and you asked for help and you were a little bit more vulnerable that you need help, people showed up for us. It was amazing. Anyone have a thought about that?
I guess I'll jump in, in terms of roller coaster, true, like I tested negative. Oh, wait a minute. Now, 3 days after, a week after, I had to test again. Am I going to up and down? One person's positive. Is there going to be anyone else positive? Are we going to go into outbreak again? And then ripping down the plastic and declaring us, out of outbreak. And then the roller coaster goes up again. It was emotionally difficult to do that. Before I mention the community, which was amazing, I will say that this pandemic really kind of touched the heart of our Eden principles of battling loneliness, boredom, and helplessness. I just want to say it out loud there, because it seems like more than other medical things, it targeted those things. I mean, I remember it was like the air was sucked out of the room. People just stayed in their rooms and the doors were closed. And so when I started, I think the first thing that I kind of gained some strength with is when we were not in outbreak mode, or when we were in outbreak mode and I put PPE on and went in. I remember going in and helping a resident connect with their family. And I think we have to acknowledge too that we were also afraid as individuals that we were going to take a virus, into our community or into our family. So I remember entering that room thinking, I don't care at this point. This man needs to talk to his family. And just, again, what I received from that resident and what I received from that family had nothing to do with the virus or COVID. It was just human compassion and empathy, kind of a genuineness that doesn't exist when you're not afraid, and that I remember thinking, this is where the life of the community is right now, and then as far as the community goes, and sort of the outside community, we got donations from organizations that we had not even networked with in the past. I remember a Taiwan organization, a church, came and brought a bunch of PPE to us. We had family members make masks, and they were trying to innovate as quickly as they could to, like, what is the mask that's better than a surgical mask, and even, you know, as good as an N95, putting filters in and going to Home Depot and, you know, really trying to do all that they could. And then just the gifts of food. So not only, you know, really caring for their loved ones, but caring for the care partners that they knew were in the community. I mentioned the example of, you know, the greater Claremont Park community. All of the support that we got from them was just, and we were still having morning meeting, and then, you know, the whole Zoom, getting used to taking ourselves off mute, which we're still struggling with, and then just receiving that that care from other people who knew that, you know, what we were going through. It was essential for us, you know, getting through it, knowing that the community cared.
Yeah, the thing that also struck me is we learned about situational leadership during this time. That and it was community to community too. So what Claremont Park needed from support was different than what Casey's Pond needed, which is different than Demery Crossing needed. Pat and Jane, you both really kind of thought this through a little bit about what does situational leadership look like, because everyone, not one community was at the same place with this pandemic at a time. And all of us talked about how you have to meet people where they're at. Jane, you kind of had a thought about that.
Yeah, definitely meeting people where they're at. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned in the last year is that I need to take a step back. I'm one that I just want to move forward. I just want to keep getting things done and moving forward and looking ahead. And sometimes that works against me because others with me aren't in the same place. And so I needed to take a step back, pause, push the pause button, and meet people where they were at. And there was a lot of people that needed time. A lot of executive directors weren't ready for some of this information to come at them. And we needed to shape our support to meet individual needs. We looked for different resources to support our team members, you know, area therapists and employee assistance programs. Even just by offering them, I don't know that we had a lot of takers, but just being able to offer that for individuals to seek additional support was very, very helpful for us. But my biggest lesson was that I needed to pause and not just trample over and get things done, but that I needed to take a step back.
Pat, did you have anything to add on to that?
I do. I remember studying situational leadership model in college, and, you know, kind of going over my head going, yeah, well, there's another leadership model. And then when we were in the middle of COVID, I thought, wow, this is what they were talking about. And it was really, really a powerful leadership model to follow. So what it says is that leaders are the ones that have to be flexible and adapt to what their teams need at that moment. And as Jane said, our teams were at different stages. And it was really hard for me to adapt because my most comfortable leadership role is coaching. But I had to be a delegator. I had to be really strong at some point, saying, okay, this is what you're doing and this is how you're doing it. And the teams, they would, you know, go up and down. We had different things going on with COVID. It had peaks and valleys. So first it was just COVID's here. Oh my God. That was a very delegating time for all of us. And then the team started to take on more roles themselves and started feeling more comfortable about testing and some of those other things. And then that big debate about should we test our staff? That was another roller coaster. And then it was the mandated testing. I remember people were kind of frozen then. And then the vaccinations. And through each of those different peaks and valleys, the teams have really just been different. Every time there's something different. And the leader has to adjust to make sure the team's needs are met. So I found that really, really fascinating. And we did, you know, the teams needed a lot of support, and each team needed different types of support at different times. So in our clinical weekly meetings, we would have all kinds of education available. We had education from professionals about PTSD and vicarious trauma and different ways to take care of yourself by meditation, relaxation techniques, maintaining a routine in your life, all those kind of things. And I could see light bulbs going off with different team members for each of the educational sessions. So it was really important that we gave people tools for when they were ready for them, and when they needed them, they had them in their back pocket.
We also deployed our Chaplain Program. So our Chaplain Program really is our ownership, the communities that we own through our not-for-profit. But we deployed them to our other communities and did blessings of the hands, just because everybody needed something different. And I remember we were doing the blessing of the hands with a community in Ohio, and and they were on their little tablet and all their PPE, and we're trying to do the blessing of the hands with them. It was just so touching. So I think that was another thing, is really not being afraid to put every type of support out there. It could be spiritual, it could be like you said, coaching, it could be formal training, informal support. There was a lot of things. And I want to bring Jill in here, because this is about the time where Jill joined us. So we were also in a leadership transition as an organization. Our CEO left the organization in, I think it was February, March timeframe, and we were in an interim situation for quite a while. And then Jill joined our organization. I think your first formal day was in November-ish, but Jill was already part of us because she's a family member. So she's been with us on the whole journey, but just as a family member. And then she stepped in to join us, the battle team, if you will. And Jill, you found an organization that was a little tired at that time, and we needed to kind of rebuild our resiliency. And that was something that we really needed to focus on for everyone. Talk to us a little bit about stepping in and what that was like, and what leadership lessons you learned coming into an experience that you didn't have the history, but you did in a different way.
Yeah, it was so interesting being a family member. My parents live at one of the Christian living communities, and being a family member and experiencing the leadership of the organization. I was watching those town hall meetings where all of you were presenting. I was getting those phone calls about cases in my parents' communities. And even before I rejoined the organization, some of the big lessons I learned is, there were times where, as Pat said, right, you do the best you can with what you know, and rules were put in place. And I remember my parents being like, this doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, then, go talk to people, and things got adjusted, right? That the leadership had that capacity, which I think is pretty extraordinary during a time like this, when so much is on the line. That leadership had the capacity and the willingness to say, okay, hold on a minute. Let's think about whether this, did that guideline go a little bit too far, or are we practicing surplus safety, and really engaging residents in being part of the solution. And then, joining the organization when I did, everybody's tired. And it was right when we were hearing, okay, their vaccinations are coming. And I remember, again, that just when you're speaking about being naive, I was very naive with this, with like, oh, well, that'll be the end of this then. And then realizing that this is a long journey, a long journey out of this. And how do you keep people going, and how do we maintain that resilience? Someone explained it to me, Bob Kramer actually, that this is like people, in the beginning, you thought you were running a 5K. And you're like, I can do this. It's only a 5K. And then it turns into a 10K. And then it's like the race isn't ending. Now it's a marathon. It's this never ending thing, which really takes its toll on people. And I think what I see happening in the organization is that everyone, the residents, team members, leaders, everyone has learned even more about those things, that loneliness, helplessness, and boredom, because everyone's learned it or has lived it. And there's a real desire to, how do we, yes, we still have some restrictions, but how can we bring life back? And what everything's changed in the past year. So what's our new vision? And how do we use our vision statement to guide us to a new future? And when, you can't always keep moving forward like Jane wants to, right? Just keep marching ahead. But you need to, too. You need to not just have your head down looking at the immediate, but lift your eyes to the future. And my perception of that is it gives people energy, and it brings people's excitement back about the future. And then also recognizing that, my gosh, there's competence here and resilience that none of us ever thought we had, and how that will take us to an even better future when we do eventually come out of this.
I think also we're in it was all along in the comments you mentioned, but residents really do lead the way. And if we continue to listen to residents and listen to team members closely, they do lead us the way. They show us the way. And Jane and Pat were pretty instrumental in formation of it was the Health and Happiness Committee. We were trying to balance the health of everyone and the regulations with the happiness. And it was a resident-directed committee that we went to grab some information and to try and open things up. Pat or Jane, do you want to talk a little bit about that? And then Dawn and Brad, I want to invite you, because I know you each have a resident story too, where residents really, or a team member really helped us lead the way.
Sure.
Jane, how about you? Go ahead, Pat.
I remember we were getting all these new state regulations, and I remember I was on a Zoom call with my clinical team, and I just thought that I can't handle this anymore. I cannot handle another new regulation that does not look at the whole person. And I remember saying to the team, what about our residents' happiness? All they seem to worry about is their health. Said, we've got to start looking at their happiness. And that's where that health and happiness came about. And we started kind of thinking about, well, how do we get the residents more involved in this? And how do we start looking at, as Jill has talked about, what can we do? Not just what can't we do, which was what all the regulations were saying. And that's when we started to think about structuring a program where we could get more of the residents' input and look at happiness, not just health. So Jane, I'll give it to you from there.
Yeah, one of my favorite outcomes from the Health and Happiness Committee, I think it was probably 2 months into the committee meeting, is that the residents in one particular community, and this is expanded to other communities, but the residents decided what metrics they wanted to look at, because it wasn't black and white. This is for independent living. The metrics weren't the regulations weren't black and white for the independent living residents. And so the residents met, gathered input, reviewed it with nursing clinical team member who was very instrumental in doing all the research for us and making sure that we weren't leaving anything on the table that we hadn't addressed. And the residents decided, if the county positivity rate is this and the state positivity rate is this, and then we would be able to do these things. And they came up with a green, yellow, red system based on the different metrics. And what an empowering thing for people to be able to do. They all became comfortable with it. They worked together as a community, the team and the residents, and developed the system that they still use today. And so that was a favorite outcome of mine from the Health and Happiness Committee.
And so my dad's has been on that committee, and I can tell you it totally changed the perspective of residents from, well, now what are they going to tell us to do, to we've decided this, what makes sense for us, our neighbors, to keep us all safe. And it's just a whole different reality when people are involved. The people that live in our communities are involved with coming up with how should things work. It's so powerful.
Brad, how about you? Any examples of either residents or team members, once we kind of got out of our dictator mode and started to get back to our culture, what example do you have of either residents or team members leading the way for you?
Right. So I think in the beginning, there was a lot of excitement by both residents and staff members. We had all these ideas, like, let's get this in. We can't wait for that first day that we can do this. And, I don't know that there was any specific person that really led the way. It was just everybody had such enthusiasm and another little breath of life, something to look forward to, right? Now, let's look back at the reality of what happened too, is that we kind of got sideswiped a little bit, thinking once we open this up, that first day is going to be a circus. Like everybody is going to be, blowing up balloons, and this is going to be wonderful. And we also had a stark reality hit us, and that was, it did not take long for people to become institutionalized. You know how hard that was? It was a kick in the stomach when residents had the opportunity. We were like, okay, let's do this. And no, I'm fine. I don't want to. No, I don't think I'm gonna do this. That was something very real that I think we need to think back on too, because to me, that was the lesson. When we talk about our Eden principles, we oftentimes embrace the fun things, the exciting things that we're going to do. And that's when the Eden principles really came back to, loneliness, helpless, and boredom. Here's the real life example right now. And that only took 3 months before people felt, no, let's do, dining. We're back. We're going to sit there. I think I'll maybe eat in my room. Those were the challenges that I think we learned. And that's where the health and happiness came back from, is finding different ways, because the health and happiness committee were giving us tools, right? But what we found was that we had to do things so different. We were on an engagement of one-on-one of trying to figure out what was going to work for that person, because that broad thing that we were trying to achieve, it didn't happen. That was the shift. And so all of those tools just were kind of that situational leadership that Pam talked about. And difficult to put into words, is tough. It was exciting at the same time. But I think that guidance and what developed from that committee really helped us accomplish that one-on-one, or we would have been trudging through the mud, and it would have been even slower.
Don, how about your perspective?
Yeah, I think that particular red, yellow, green guidance was really instrumental to our residents, living in residential living in particular, and really, empowered them. As it turned out, it also had to remain flexible, because as we learned more about the variants and mask usage and physical distancing, it kind of got modified, and I found that the residents were extremely resilient, flexible, with that as well. I guess my stories of, I do think the health suites, our nursing home level of care of living was particularly impacted, obviously, by this. And I do think of I guess it's principle 7 of Eden, in terms of, we're more than a medical diagnosis. And I do think that our goals tended to be keep the virus out, keep people safe, get the virus out when it is in here. I'm not sure that was the residents' feelings, especially our residents living with dementia. I remember one resident who had COVID and recovered from it. She just kind of got to the point, like, I'm not staying in my room anymore, and you're not going to tell me to stay in my room. And she, so we kind of followed the residents' lead in terms of, this is, why should she have to stay in her room? And how can we get her out of her room safely? What we realized in the summertime, and again, the residents led this, was there's no one saying that we can't go outside. So we literally, I remember on our leadership team, our morning calls, I would challenge the team and say, try to at least take one resident around the community. And the care partners were doing as much as they could, but a lot of times the leaders are the ones that had the ability to have that flexibility. I had some of the most enriching experiences doing that. I think we all know, I can't mention, I guess, residents' names, but just amazing. The stories that would come up, and just the fresh air And, and at that point, I'd let the mask slip below their nose because we were outside. I'd keep my mask on. And that was really kind of a very organic thing that developed. Another thing I think in life enrichment, a resident mentioned, like, I really miss going on a trip, or they were reminiscing about a trip. We had a virtual cruise, and we put that together. It was in one of the colder months. It wasn't as easy to get outside, but they decorated the community and people's apartments like the sea, and they had portholes, on the doors instead of windows, and we had ports of call. And so, of course, we had like different cocktails depending on what the port of call was, and the food went along with that. That was it was a respite, and that's what I would say about. We didn't find a solution and sustained it like, oh, we solved this COVID problem and the loneliness and boredom and helplessness. But we did, through the leadership of the residents, we did find a couple respites. And I don't know, I hope that people weren't going to listen to this and think like they were going to now know what to do and never be impacted by COVID again. But I think it was just kind of tripping upon some of the things that were bright spots and then tapping into what really is meaningful. It's not about whether you're, testing or doing PPE and all that. It's more about those experiences where life is happening. And those are just a couple examples that come to mind.
Well, gang, we've been talking for almost an hour already. We're almost out of time. I think we could probably go on and on forever. A couple of things, we made compliance fun. We did a video contest, a mask up challenge video contest. There's a video you need to see. It was retreat at Sunny Vista. Mask, what was it? What was it? Mask baby or something like that. They did the whole ice cube thing. It was super fun. But lots of, making sure you have fun with those things that aren't so fun, like compliance. But we did want to give everyone a chance to just kind of say your one last thought. What was your one last thing that's really sitting with you that you've been kind of marinating on, or a leadership lesson? And I'm going to start with Pat. Pat, what's the one thing you wanted to share? And we've only got a few minutes.
Yeah, the one thing that I reflect upon is how important your mission and values are in your organization, and how much you really have to understand them and believe in them, because they help you make the right decisions. If you always reflect back on your mission and values, you'll make the right decision.
Okay, great. Thanks, Pat. Jane, how about yourself?
Yeah, if you haven't already done so, for those of you that have joined us, take some time and reflect on what was the silver lining in the last year. And that is really healing for me to look back and say, well, what do I appreciate about the last year? I received a lot of cards, handwritten cards. I appreciate that our organization pushed the pause button on other initiatives that weren't as important, and so that we could focus on all of the things that we needed to do to mitigate the virus and spreading in our communities. And I appreciate how much I was able to connect with team members virtually, and how much I've learned about things like this. So take a moment and reflect and find those silver linings in the last year.
Awesome, Jane. Thank you. Brad, how about yourself?
Yeah, I would just stress the ability to humble yourself and to also be vulnerable. We had to step up and be these, this iron champion for so long to get through these tough spots, that shifting out of that and getting back into that vulnerable state and letting yourself be open and accept that, wow, we made some mistakes. It's hard, but it was out of the right place. We were doing this for the right reasons. And, sometimes as a leader, it's difficult to look back and say, wow, I made some mistakes like this, but you have to stop. You have to put that time out there, and you have to let others care for you. That's hard to do, but it was something that at least personally got me through and continues to get me through. And it was just a check for the rest of my life to really look forward and to think about, are we doing that? Are we opening ourselves up and being vulnerable and sharing our weaknesses?
Thanks, Brad. That's wonderful. Hey, Dawn, how about you? Some thoughts?
Yeah, I think what I've learned is, when you're stripped away of knowing what to do and stripped away of being able to use your experience and your knowledge about knowing what to do, you lead more authentically, and you're open to it not being about your failure or anyone else's failure, it being more about genuinely listening and communicating in a way that is completely genuine and focusing on what's important, not focusing on things that are not important, but focusing on relationships, focusing on empathy, focusing on resilience, and focusing on what matters most instead of what's the matter. So I think that's what I've learned. Great,
Dawn. Thank you. Jill, how about yourself?
Yeah, I want to just tie in a comment that I just saw from Andre Stevens. Hi, Andre. Just about what everybody's been talking about with being transparent, with being vulnerable. When we do that, as Andre says, this is so valuable and is helping me not to feel so alone. Glad to hear very open and transparent experiences. It's helping me to heal. When we do that, we're not just helping ourselves be stronger, but we're helping other people heal and not feel so alone. And thank you, Andre, for that comment.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I guess just for me, my lesson was essentially mistakes happen and it's okay. And that's how we learn. And learning the hard way is still learning. And it's still a very valuable lesson. And so to forgive yourself, you did the best you could at the time you knew how to do it. And then as you knew better, you did better. And I think that is the overriding lesson that CLC has learned and Cappella has learned, that we did the best we could at each time. But we were humble enough to say we could do better. Now that we know better, we're going to do better. And that's how we are reclaiming our culture and our communities. And it's not all the way there, but we're trying. So that's about it. Meredith, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Wow. Thank you all so much. Your accolades are pouring in. Thanking you for your transparency today, your openness, your honesty. And, it just brings up for me this quote by John Dewey. And he says, we do not learn from our experiences. We learn from reflecting on our experiences. So thank you for this reflection. And Jane, we're going to take your closing thoughts as our call to action to reflect. Let's all reflect on this past year and learn from it. And just want to thank you all for your time, for your stories, for sharing, and just have a great day.